We need to see each other's humanity. Whether or not we agree with them, that's a different story.
Who are we, and what experiences in our life shaped us? If you grew up as a baby boomer, there's a wealth of factors to choose from: civil rights, the women's movement, Vietnam, protests, free love, and more. We all know the global forces, but what about the very personal stories that shape us as individuals? That's the focus of our next guest, who has interviewed everyone from a woman who worked on Nixon's re-election campaign to a retired policewoman who supports defunding the police and everything in between. To hear her story, stay tuned. Welcome to Seniority Authority, the podcast where I track down experts to answer your questions on aging. Thanks to our show sponsor, the Riverwoods Group, Northern New England's largest family of nonprofit retirement communities, where active adults find community, purpose, and peace of mind. Visit riverwoodsgroup.org. Now, let's hear from today's guest. Welcome to Seniority Authority. I'm your host, Cathleen Toomey. It is a huge thrill for me to welcome Joanne Allen, host of Been There, Done That podcast, to the show today. Joanne has done everything in radio for the past 40 years. Reporter, anchor, producer for the prestigious WNYC, WHYY, KPBS, and now with Colorado Public Radio. A former adjunct professor at Long Island University, she's taught radio journalism and now does screenwriting and voiceover work in her free time. And just 2 years ago, she launched a successful podcast called Been There, Done That, sharing real-life stories that shaped members of the baby boom generation. Joanne, I am thrilled to have you here today.
Kathleen, I am so happy to be with you. Thanks for asking me.
Oh, it's a delight to have you. And I'm going to turn the tables a little bit on you after, being a fan of your podcast. You've done everything on radio, produced, anchored, reporter from New York City to California and Colorado. What made you fall in love with radio?
I, as a little girl, loved to listen to the radio. And my dad had this old Zenith transistor radio that when he got a new radio, he gave me his old one. And so I was so thrilled. At night, I would get in bed, cover my head, turn on that transistor radio and listen to voices coming from around the country, wafting through the air late at night. And it was just such a romantic feeling. It just enveloped me with a sense of there's so much out there for me to learn about and to get to see and experience that as a kid, I felt like I was transported to other places. And just hearing those voices in the night, I wanted to be one of those voices in the night.
Wow. And you achieved your dream. Now, you grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and came of age in the 1960s. I can't imagine a more tumultuous and challenging time. What was your legacy of the 60s? And how did that change or shape your expectations for your life?
Well, growing up as a young Black kid in this country, the 60s that decade was a real game changer for young Black kids growing up, because it was in the 60s that we were taught we could do and be anything we wanted to be or do. That wasn't so true for my older brothers and sisters who are about 10, 15 years older than me. They did not have the opportunities that we saw with Head Start and affirmative action that gave us a deserved leg up from, when my parents and the generations before me had absolutely no opportunities. So there was this extra push to give Black students, in particular at that time, to give Black students that extra help to make it in society, to get into college, to go for a job, to have a sort of confidence about yourself that you could go out into the world and make it whatever you wanted it to be. So the 60s were very important in the life of, I think, baby boomers who are now in their 60s, because we were given opportunities that generations before us never had.
Now, you shine with confidence and joy. And is that something that you have always had growing up in the 60s with these opportunities? Did you feel burdened by responsibility, or did you feel freed by unfettered expectations?
Well, I would say I felt free, that's for sure. I think that the expectations that were put on us, because we had these opportunities, was a little bit burdensome, because much like when we think of a family and we think of a family that's well-to-do, all of the kids in that family have got to do well. They better do well. And that's kind of a burden you put on them. It's not always a bad thing, but it can be somewhat of a burden. And so I think we felt the pressure when we integrated high schools down in Mobile. We felt the pressure to do very well as students. If we were doing poorly, then that would have said we didn't belong there. But
that's a huge responsibility. You have you're carrying your whole race. Every time you walk in the door of somewhere, you have this extra pressure on you.
And especially when you'd walk into a classroom like I did in high school, where I was the only Black student in that class. It could have been English or chemistry or whatever, but there were some classes where I was the only Black student. So I always felt like I needed to come out of myself and to perform and to do well because of the sacrifices of, my forefathers, but also the sacrifices that my family endured to send me to a private school, a Catholic school.
Yeah, so, you have a large family.
Yeah, there was that feeling of, all right, you're in school now, you've got to do well. And what does doing well mean? It doesn't mean you cower in the corner, it means you really bring yourself out. And so I kind of attribute my extrovertness, if you will, to the fact that I had to be out all the time. I had to be out of myself. I had to show what I could do. I had to prove it.
How did that skill help you? You're just a marvelous interviewer. And we were talking earlier, you have the ability to build this fabulous rapport with people and then kind of crack them open, and get them to reveal themselves. Did that come innately to you, or was that somehow informed by how you grew up and how you lived your life in the 60s? What ability that you have cultivated has helped you interview like that? Get people to share their stories?
Well, I think, and as you continue as an interviewer, I think you just find that if you're concerned about the issue you're talking about or concerned about the person that you're speaking to, if it's a subject that you've experienced, something that you've experienced, so you know what it feels like, you can empathize. I think it's probably just a culmination of all aspects of who I am and have been, in that I am genuinely interested, Kathleen, when I speak to somebody, in what they have to say. I know me. I know what I have to say. I'm already aware of Joanne. I want to know about you. I want to know what you're feeling, what you're thinking, how you're going to react in a certain way. And what you do in order to bring that out of people is just to simply show that you care about what they're saying, that you're not going to be judgmental. You really want to learn what happened. Why did you crash your plane? I mean, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. No, I didn't talk to John that way. I just spoke to him as if, wow, he was going through an intense experience and it must have been very scary and tough and hard. And tell me about that, John. What happened? So you just get a kind of a sound in your voice and a caring that allows people to really open up.
Well, it is that curiosity that is a driving through line, I think, in your life, from growing up and lying under the covers and listening to all these voices in all over the world and being curious about the places you hadn't been, and then becoming a reporter and also being curious and digging into stories. That is a real thread that's in your life.
It is. Yeah.
And tell me about why you started the podcast, because this is like a busman's holiday, right? You're on radio, you're everything on radio, and then for fun and kicks, you do a podcast, a radio podcast in your spare time. Why did you start Been There, Done That? What was your goal?
Well, I don't know how long it took for you to incubate your podcast, but mine took, I would say, from the moment I first thought about it, a good 5 years. Well, I knew that when I was done with my radio career, that I would want to do something. I'm not going to just sit down and look out the window. And so what I do best is audio. And I thought, oh, yeah, I should do a podcast. And then from that moment of thinking, I should do a podcast, obviously the next thing is, well, what would I do? And I wanted it to be something that wasn't journalism, because I've been practicing that all my life. And I'm ready to let go of many of the strictures of journalism, of where you had to be precise about your reporting and the facts, just the facts. And you wouldn't let people just give an opinion unless you give the counter opinion and all of that kind of stuff. And I thought, I want to just do radio. I want to do audio without having to go through all of that and making sure that this, that, and the other are all right in exact right place. So then I thought, well, okay, I'll do a podcast. What do I want to do? At first, I thought I wanted to do kind of a point counterpoint with young people and older people, talking to each other and teaching each other, and also getting older people to not feel as though it's horrible not to be young. And when you get these whippersnappers out there and they think they know everything, and they also sort of have this hubris about them that they think you want to be their age. You want to be young again. Well, I have this thing of where I want to say, you know what, young person, you might want to be old. Why? Because we know a lot more than you do. So I just wanted to get a dialogue kind of going. And then I thought, wow, there's going to be a lot of getting a lot of different people together to talk. And I thought, yeah, that's too complicated. I'm slowing down with my retirement, so I'm not going to get too crazy with that. I don't want to have a podcast of where I've got to, get about 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 guests every time. It's like, no, okay, so what's an easier way to do this? Well, I've always been interested in other people's lives, their stories. What are they thinking? How are they feeling? Had they experienced some of the same things I've experienced? Did they come through it the same way? I just want to hear the real life stories of people from my generation, because everybody has at least a good 10 stories from their life by the time they get into their 60s, at least 10 good ones. And I just like stories. I want to hear them. I want to tap into them. And I want older people. I want baby boomers. I want us to feel ourselves. I want us to just be out there, be in the world, be present. Don't shy away, because we still have a lot to offer. We don't need to just sit down and do nothing. We've got a lot to offer, and it's called experience.
I love that, because you're exactly right. The young people can have hubris that we are all that in a bag of chips. It's not necessarily so. I think a lot of us who are older, who are in their 60s, don't want to go back to our 20s. We've been there, done that, to borrow a phrase. And it's part of being proud of your age and being proud. And I think your shows, your episodes, and your ability to let people tell their story lets them reclaim that pride that I survived this plane crash or this Watergate experience or, this time in the police. And I have something to say about this. It's real authority that comes out of your guests, I think.
Yeah. It's also, I really enjoy it in large part because I learn. I'm talking to people, I'm holding a conversation with them. I'm not just trying to impart stuff that I've experienced, which I do, but they're imparting stuff that they've experienced. And it just feels like a learning situation. It just feels like we can all help each other. If we would all help each other, Kathleen, think of how much better this world would be if you could just help people.
That is so true. Do you think that is something that is a result of your podcast, that people at this precise age, 60 plus, these boomers, the ability to listen to other people's stories, do you think that helps your audience face the next chapter and think about it differently?
I think that anytime you hear someone is going through something similar that you've been through, or that they've had the joy of something similar to the joy of something that you've had, it just brings us a little bit closer to each other. It helps us to see the humanity in each other. And more so than anything right now, I think we need to do that. We need to see each other's humanity. Whether or not we agree with them, that's a different story. But if you can look upon another person as being equal to you in terms of feelings and abilities and the way you are in the world, if you see someone else as being your equal, that helps us to ease some of the hardships and some of the pain that we're seeing right now. So I just want people to stop and erase as much of the prejudice and as much of the hatefulness and as much of the meanness that we have in the world. Let's just talk to each other and let's respect each other. I don't have to make you believe what I believe, but don't try and put onto me what you believe too. So we can live with each other having different ideas and different ways of being, I think.
It's like, don't discount me as a human because I don't agree with you. Don't
Exactly.
demonize me because we disagree. And you're right, getting to a point of empathy helps provide that bridge to understanding. So I understand where you're coming from. I don't agree with you, but I'm not going to revile you. It's that takes away that emotion, I think. If you're getting smarter, help us reach more minds. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts so others know we're legit. Tell your friends to follow us on social or subscribe to our newsletter at seniorityauthority.org.
Yeah, I'm not going to negate you as another person because we don't believe the same things, or we don't do the same things, or we don't look alike, or whatever, or we don't enjoy food the same, or sex the same, or whatever. It's like we need to just see each individual as a person.
You know what I think is interesting? Earlier, you were talking about this podcast does free you from the traditional reporting, but a lot of your episodes follow or echo what's going on in the news, like defunding the police, your story with Alex in episode 4, the interview with Greg and Rachel on anti-Asian hate. How do you decide whose story to tell? And do these individuals come to you? Do you just find them? How does that trajectory work?
Well, with Greg and Rachel and with Alex, it was because those issues were in the news. And obviously I'm in the news every day, not for much longer though. And it just made me wonder, what is a boomer thinking about that? What is a retired cop, which is what a boomer would be. What would a retired cop think about that? So I called up a former police officer friend of mine, and asked her if she would talk to me. And she she understood why I was doing it, but she really didn't want to do the interview. And so I said, well, I'm still looking for a cop. So if you know of anyone, and she suggested Alex.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And so Alex was an incredible find because the woman was so articulate and so emotional and so raw and so true. I mean, she really kept it at 100 all the way through the interview. And I felt in talking with her that I had learned so much. See, I'll start an interview off. I know where I want to get the interview to. I want to get to this main situation that occurred in your life, this incident or whatever. But to get to that point, I want to learn about you as that person, that police officer, that Asian person, that pilot. Tell me about yourself. Tell me how you, just like what you're doing with me, essentially, how you got into flying. Tell me about why you wanted to be a police officer. And then tell me, what does it mean to become a police officer? What do you go through? What's the training like? What are you thinking? Are you ever scared? I mean, these were things that I wanted to know about policing because I don't know those things about policing. There have been times when I've thought about just taking the police test, the police academy test, just to see what they do and what they go through. I did not have time to do all of that, but I thought it would have been fun. So here I had this cop, and I thought, just tell me all about, your life and leading up to why you became a cop. And so then after that, we started talking about some of her issues around defunding the police and why she felt it was important for people to understand what that phrase means. Because I think now we're getting a little bit better sense of what it means. It doesn't mean get rid of the police department. It means send the right people on a call, on emergency calls. And she really felt extremely emotional about that, and extremely emotional that she wasn't as aware of racial issues while she was on the force as she is today. That just learning about policing and then hearing a very proud, decorated cop talk about what do we need to do going forward. And it's defund the police in her estimation.
And the emotion was clear in her testimony, in her conversation with you. It was so real. And we read about these issues every day in the paper, and we hear about them in radio and TV. This deeper dive into the passion of a policeman and their reaction really gave me a different point of view on it. And that episode and all the episodes that we talk about today are going to be in the show notes for you to check out. But that's episode 4 in Been There, Done That. Really powerful.
So pleased that you were touched and moved by it, because it's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted people who hate police to hear about some of the stuff they go through. What is it like to go knock on a door to serve a warrant? I wouldn't do it.
No.
But at the same time, if somebody is bothering me, I'm going to call the police. I'm a Black woman in America, but I'm calling the police. I've been stopped 4 times by police wrongfully, but I will still call them if I need help. So it's that thing of let's really assess what policing is about and also give the due respect to those who do the job well.
Like your episode that you had a very positive encounter the last time you were pulled over by a police officer who gave you his card, I think.
Yes.
And you said, this is policing done right.
Yeah.
Policing in and of itself is not bad. It's something that we need. It's just a matter of understanding what they go through when they're in these situations.
Exactly. Because, even in some of this body camera footage that we see, when you see the cops approaching someone who does look dangerous, I mean, Joanne would be going in that direction. That ain't for me. But I also don't want you to go and beat the hell out of that man. And Greg and Rachel, I learned so much about Asian living. And it makes sense what they're saying, including the whole idea of you just kind of be as American as you possibly can. You don't what is the saying? You don't rock
the boat. You don't poke the bear. You're just...
Yeah, you just go along to get along, or you get along to go along, whatever that saying is. And so I do know that it seems as though, according to Greg and to Rachel, that as Asians, they tend to try and draw no attention to themselves, and obviously, I mean, even after the internment camps, you get out of the internment camp in the 40s and you still try and act as American as possible. You don't, you still recede, as much as possible. So I learned a lot about what it's like to, in this day and age, to walk the streets as an Asian person. I get Black people being attacked. To an extent, I get Hispanics being attacked. Asians, I'm like, why are people attacking it? And so to hear that they are coming out of themselves, in a sense, that they as Asian people, they're still cautious, but they're also going to at least do 1 or 2 things to help end Asian hate.
And I think that's the other part of Been There, Done That I really appreciate is, and it's what I try to do to a small extent in this podcast, is to give people something to think about, a different point of view, open up their minds to a different point of view, and then give them ideas about what to do after they leave. My goal is always, what can our listeners do? What can our listeners learn? How do you change situations? And I think your podcast, by presenting those different points of view, talks about that, but also talks about how can we change this now? What do we do with the information now that we have it? And those are big changes.
Yeah. And I would say the first thing you do is you take that information to heart and you hold it there. If you've learned something new about another person and you really feel it, hold it there for a while. Really get it. And if your next interaction, you don't show that you've actually really gotten it, that's okay. You'll have another interaction at some point in which you can bring out that which you know to be true and you feel.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about feeling, Kathleen.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
really,
no.
it's about emotions. It's about connecting with each other. It's about loving each other. It's about caring for each other. It's about talking to each other. We just have this opportunity as we have come out of this pandemic year, or are coming out of this pandemic year, I should say. We've had to take stock. Who are we? Who do we want to be? How do we want to act? And I would hope that older people will continue to be alive and vocal and put their 2 cents in and make sure that this world is also partly ours.
How do you think this boomer generation is going to change aging? Like, we're just getting started. You haven't retired yet. How do you think we're going to change things? Or what would you like to see?
Wow. What a question. What would I like to see? I think it's a matter of boomers being themselves, boomers taking that word, boomer, and owning it. Okay, boomer. I thought that was going to be funny. It ain't funny. I'm like, yeah, okay. Okay, boomer. But to be proud of our generation and to go back and remember our youth when things were changing, then they kind of got waylaid a little bit in the 80s and 90s. I don't even know what happened in the 80s and 90s. But then in the 2000s and now in the 2010s and now actually the 2020s, we had the opportunity to remind people that we need to treat everybody fairly. That was the whole idea from the 60s, the changes that we saw coming down the pike. And then they stopped in the 80s with, I don't know, Reagan coming in. It was like something happened in the 80s and a lot of that progress stopped. There was this thing of, well, folks who are downtrodden, they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. If they can't pull themselves up by their bootstraps, then they don't deserve it. Nobody pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. Everybody gets help. Everybody is given a leg up in some way. I mean, had I known, well, maybe not, but this is just a hypothetical. Had I known about Harvard and Yale and all of that when I went off to school or when I was in grade school to get better grades, so that when you get to one of those Ivy League schools, you get the plum jobs, either in government or finance or whatever. I wish I had known about that. I mean, I wish I had been on that track. Mm-hmm. And I think the next step after my generation was in college would have been to have had more minority students on that track. But the 80s came along and affirmative action became a dirty word or dirty, that anything that was minority students were allowed to do was seen as they were being given everything. White kids had been given everything all their lives. And now when it comes to minority students getting a little extra something, that's not right. So I guess I'm just bringing it down to remember what we were thinking about in the 60s and 70s, revise that and bring it into the 2020s. Does that make sense to you?
It does. What it says to me is we're not done yet. No. It says we got to keep going. And there's more revolution to work. And we need to keep changing. And I think that we don't want people to give up and sit back just because they're 60 plus. No time to give up and sit back. Use your experience, use your voice, use that knowledge that is hard won through your experiences, through your failures, through your heartache, through your disappointment, and turn that wheat into chaff. I think I got that wrong. But anyway, use your experience to keep the work going and keep engaged in the world, which is, I think, one of the first things you said when we first started this conversation is that I want people's voices to be heard and for them to realize that we, these boomers, are the predominant, like pig in the python. When you look at it demographically, we're like dominating from a demographic standpoint, even though the younger generation has their digital natives and they know a lot more about technology and they are cutting edge. We still have more work to do.
Yeah, and the younger folks, they have all of that technology, but they don't have life experiences. They don't know how to live life yet. They're just beginning to live life. And if you are an older person or a boomer and you remember what your ideals were as a younger person in terms of equality, try and summon those back. And then after you've summoned them back, do something every week that fulfills what you think the world should be like. Do something every week. You might, I don't know, mentor a kid. You might be a volunteer at a hospital. You might do something that has to do with you giving back, but also fulfills what you want to see the world to become. Do something physical if you can, once a week, that promotes how you feel about the world and promotes how you want the world to become, I guess I should say.
So that's great homework for everyone listening. This is your takeaway. Stay engaged. Do something physical once a week.
If you can.
Physical, and it could be, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to walk to a soup kitchen. You could write a check. You could write a letter. You could write your congressman. You could, as you said, Joanne, mentor a young adult. I have this vision of this idea that I want to happen at some point where we get older adults and high school kids together, and the high school kids teach the older adults about technology, and the older adults teach the kids about interacting face to face and share their history. So that's your homework. That's how to stay engaged, is do something every week that reinforces your original vision that you had when you were growing up about what you want the world to be.
Oh, that sounds so beautiful. You said it perfectly.
Good. Well, I love it, because that's what we're hoping to do, is helping people. Do you have a dream guest that you want to interview on your podcast? Or do you just find them as you investigate and come up with stories?
Well, my dream guest, and I've been trying for 2 years to get her on, and I think maybe one day she'll come on, fingers crossed, is Terry Gross.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Terry Gross, first of all, I would be so nervous. I would be so nervous. I did work with her at WHYY, so I know her. We're not friends or anything, but we're acquaintances. And because she writes me back and says, "Oh, I'm too busy. I can't this time." But so, just periodically I see if she's going to come on. So it would be Terry Gross, because this woman is the consummate interviewer. Well, she can get you to give a different answer by saying just one word. She'll say, you'll be giving this long, elaborate reasoning, the other, and then she would go, "Oh," and then the person would start back again, because that's all she had to do. She didn't have to go, "Well, wait a minute, what do you mean by this, and what's that?" No, she just goes, "Oh," and then the person doesn't know what else to do but to explain it further. So I do that sometimes myself when I'm interviewing someone. I learned that from Terry. They gave me an answer that I'm kind of not quite sure about. I just go, "Okay," or just something, and then they'll continue. Really
then that pregnant pause that they have to fill.
Yes. Yeah. So Terry Gross would be my dream interview. The other person I've already interviewed, actually, and it's my mom. My mom in 1992 had turned 80. So I wasn't a boomer yet, and she was beyond, she's not a boomer. And I sat down with her, or I guess it was maybe 90 minutes. And I interviewed her. I haven't listened to the interview. I haven't listened back to it. I did get it digitized, so I have it on a digital, all I need to do is, stick the USB port and listen. I just can't bring myself to do it yet.
Yeah.
But I will, because it's going to be a been there, done that.
Oh, I can't wait until that comes out. That's going to be fantastic.
It's going to be a been there, done that. But I know that I have to be ready to hear my mom's voice again. Just to be ready to feel the emotion, to cry, or whatever I'm going to go through. And I might find that it was a, schlocky interview. There may be nothing on there.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Got some stuff in there. So I will get to that maybe next year, I hope. Because my podcast runs from October through June. So maybe I'll start it off next season with my mom, but I don't know.
That would
I'd
be
love
something to look forward to.
I'd love to start it off with Terry Gross, but we'll see.
I don't know anyone that could resist you, Joanne. So Terry Gross is going to capitulate sooner or later.
I think she will. I just know that right now she is like crazy busy. I mean, you see her on TV. Just in recent years, in the last 10 years, she's been out and about more and doing events and, going on to TV. So I think she will probably slow down at some point because she's older than me, I believe. Yeah, she is a boomer. So I'm going to get you, Terry.
All right. You heard it here first. Terry Gross, stay tuned. Joanne, thank you so much for sharing your life and your ideas and your inspiration and your curiosity with us and with the world. If you haven't listened to Been There, Done That, go scurry on over to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe, and you will start seeing the world differently through these interviews.
Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you, Joanne. It's been fantastic.
And good luck with Seniority Authority.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're doing the podcast because I looked back on some of your topics and heard a couple of your interviews, and we're together. We're giving the folks what they need because you've got that more prescriptive way of putting out information, and I'm more narrative. And narrative and prescriptive together, hey, we got it going on.
That's right. We're a good twofer. Listen to both of us.
Exactly.
Well, that's our show for today. If you enjoyed it, please visit our website, seniorityauthority.org, to submit questions for future shows and watch archived episodes. Spread the word, visit us on Facebook, and subscribe on your favorite podcast site. Until next time, enjoy your chance to get smarter about growing older. Thanks to our show sponsor, the Riverwoods Group, Northern New England's largest family of nonprofit retirement communities, where active adults find community, purpose, and peace of mind. Visit riverwoodsgroup.org. That's our show for today. Did it spark a question? If so, send us your questions at seniorityauthority.org and we'll track down the answer. Meanwhile, don't forget to subscribe, like us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, let's get smarter about growing older.